That's how they did the original Atlas rockets and Mercury and Apollo and everything. That started with, we have this simple problem, let's fix that. And now what's the next problem? What's the next one? They didn't say, oh, we've got to build a 3-stage rocket with all these electrical systems and stuff. They just hit it one problem at a time. It took a while over time. They invented stuff that nobody had thought of before and got to the moon.
Welcome to Tech Talent Today, where IT leaders share their tough challenges, creative solutions, and latest insights. You'll discover fresh ideas and inspiration here with your host, IT staffing veteran and president of Claremont Technologies, Jody Kulik-Mayer. And now, here's Jody.
Welcome to Tech Talent Today. I'm your host, Jody Kulik-Mayer. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Jerry Gentry. Jerry is a Senior Director, Enterprise Architecture and Engineering for a public utility. He's a proven leader who's a catalyst for transformation. He has a history of problem solving and innovation while maintaining stability and achieving business outcomes. Jerry is experienced in all aspects of IT design and delivery, leveraging DevOps. Jerry is a Renaissance man, an active runner, cyclist, and guitarist. He's also the author of a techno thriller, Sinfin. Welcome, Jerry. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I hope you're having a good Sunday morning.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for doing this on a weekend. Makes it easier for everybody. Great. So at your company, you've incorporated DevOps into all application development. Tell me about your experience and what were some of the challenges you faced and how you addressed them?
Fun thing is that I started getting into DevOps and the whole application development thing over years. Actually did kind of an agile thing at one of my previous companies before agile was really a big name. It's how we did development there. So when I went to a software startup that was a software shop, I really got involved in, it's called the CI/CD pipeline. It's continuous integration, continuous deployment, and continuous delivery. People use different, the D means different things to different people. So at that role, it was interesting. There had been 5 acquisitions, and every one of them had their own pipeline for how they did the development and integration. And one of my roles when I came in as the head architect was to pull all those together and get to one consistent pipeline that everybody used for all the development across the company for all the different products that they had and were integrating. That took about 6 months. It was a different, when you previously, like when I've integrated infrastructure where people had different LAN switches and routers and networks and stuff, that's really, you can go in there and pull wires and plug stuff together and look at the protocols and make sure everything's flowing. And it's a lot of, Band-Aids and stuff. When you're integrating a pipeline to do software development, there's a lot more logical stuff that has to be taken care of. You need common dictionaries. You need common ways to do even the syntax within writing the code. So traditionally, you would write something like a variable name, and you would have a name underscore, second part of the name underscore. You would use underscores to differentiate the segments of the name. Now, a lot of people are using what's called camel code, where they use they start with a small letter for a variable, and then the next word in the variable name is capitalized. And so instead of an underscore, you've got these series of capitals, so it looks like a camel. And you have to decide which one of those you want to use because you want your variable names to be consistent. And then you have to go back through all your old code and update things. And so the little things like that seem trivial at first, but become very problematic when you're doing the development longer term. DevOps starts with that part of it. When you start building consistency in terms of how you're doing application development, then it comes down to how do I then take that and move it into operations? So the linkage between development and operations becomes a really important. It used to be that you would just throw it over the wall. The operations people would pick it up and hope that there was good commentary and that there was good information in the documentation. But in a DevOps environment, you ask your people who do the engineering to participate in the operations side of it, and the people in operations to participate in the engineering side of it, so that before something goes into production, the operations people have actually used it, worked with it, and understand how the assumptions being made underneath it. There's always assumptions when you engineer anything. And it's best to get those out on the table, even though they seem evident and obvious to everybody. It's always, even saying the same thing, 2 people may use the same word, but mean something different. So it's always good to have those discussions around that. And I think that was part of the success. We had the people who actually use the pipelines in the different parts of that business come together at a table. We talked about it. We diagrammed it out, came to the agreements. Everybody then talked about the agreements, poked at it, pushed at it a lot, and then ultimately got everything lined up fairly quickly. It wasn't that difficult to do, but it just took getting everybody on the same page.
Right. And it's, I guess, a different process than what people are used to. So when are you getting like the operations people involved? Is it right at the beginning, or like where do they come into the process? At
the very beginning, to let them know what you're doing. They don't have to be involved in every step along the way till you get to the point where you're past the point of, like I said, the detailed level of code. And when the process is nearly finished, when you're getting ready to say, hey, from an operations perspective, is this going to work for you? Is this a workflow that's going to hand off to you? And then are you going to get everything that you need when it gets handed off? And if you don't, do you have the right way to go back and provide feedback and have that recursive methodology that you need in order to be successful in this space? Previously, when I did application development, when I was first starting out, the goal was you write it, you send it over, and then the bugs would come up, and then people would list the bugs. You'd send it back to the developers. They would spend months hunting down the bugs and then push it on through. In a DevOps environment, there's constant feedback. And there's a lot of tools and automation that allow you to do that. And there's no one right way to do it. The way that works is the way that works for your pipeline, your company, what your end game is. In some cases, some of the pipelines are very complex and need to be that way. In some cases, I've seen some very, very large companies with huge code structures that use very simple pipelines, and they automate the hell out of it.
Right.
I saw a demo one time. It was a guy from Microsoft. Oh, no, it was Google. He was actually, he took some short piece of code, he put it up, and he hit a button, and it went through 4 cycles of testing and automation and correction and final validation and moved into production, all within about 5 seconds. And it was microcode and everything. But, the fact that they had gotten the system down to the point where it was so automated that somebody could write the code, do their little routine on it, and they just put it in the beginning of the pipeline, hit a button, and watch it go all the way through. And it got status reports as it was progressing along the pipeline and got to the end and was delivered and deployed. So like I was reading somewhere that Amazon, it actually was in a meeting at Amazon. It was a public group meeting. This is several years ago. They did 50,000 deployments a year, which is like, 5 or 6 a minute.
Wow.
Because they've broken their whole web page into micro programs. And so it's just microcode, and they can like the tax part, the calculation on your final one, it figures your tax. That's one set of code. They can change that at will, not have to change anything else on the page, and just be able to correct the taxes and that. So they've broken their whole web page, which used to be one big web page, down into all these different small microcodes, and it's very effective for them.
That's really interesting that it seems really simple at the end that you put it in, and a few seconds later it's going through, but not only like all the work that goes into that, but the people buying in to the whole process. Did you get a lot of resistance, and how did you handle that? The resistance was really in the initial part. So every developer uses their own, it's an IDE, it's their software tool that they write code into. And everybody has their own IDE that they've spent time tweaking and getting it all these little subroutines working, and they get the themes right, so the colors are just what they want and all. And they were afraid I was going to come in and say, you got to use this IDE versus that one. And I said, no, IDEs are yours. When the code comes out, I expect it to be in this format using these rules and regulations. And so they were all fine with that. What they were really looking for was getting things through the system faster, because there have been problems, because they were beginning to integrate products and the integration wasn't working and it was kicking out lots of problems. And a lot of it came down to the pipeline just being too different. Something you said, that architecture is about adapting what works for the company, not following a specific model. Agile and DevOps are a mindset as well as methodologies and tools. It's always about the people, not the technology. Can you expand on that? Yeah, because that's the trickiest part, the people. And it's really not just for software development. It's in any company can become agile. I mean, when you think about it, Agile started with Toyota manufacturing, which is the most fundamental form of process that you can think of. And actually, I just started reading the book, The Toyota Way, just because I want to get better at understanding that. And it's about managing the constraints. A constraint being a blockage, where something gets
piled up, and then you begin to build inventory at that point. Call it inventory, call it a queue, call it, just a backlog or whatever. But you manage toward the backlogs, and you keep the backlogs at a certain level, and then you stop everything else until the backlog is cleared. And what Toyota, it didn't make sense when you thought about how assembly lines worked. You wanted to get things going through as fast as possible, but Toyota would actually stop doing some stuff to wait for the constraint to fix itself. And then they would go and find out why it got constrained, the constraint being a backup. And they would go and find out, and then they would start plucking away at it until they could fix that constraint, and then they'd find another constraint. There'd always be constraints. It's a matter of, working and working until you start eliminating as many as you can. And as a result, the end game, which is putting a car out that is high quality, that's going to run 100% of the time and not have to come back and be, retrofitted or fixed. The end goal worked.
Right.
Even though they had times where they would stop lines and things, they were still putting out high quality cars at the end of the day, higher than what they had been doing before when they were running it the old way. And when you start thinking about it, so think of software in terms of cars, you want to put out bug-free software. So take the time up front, work on the constraints, work on the small. They also did it in small batches. They worked in small sections at a time. And that's a key one for doing a really good agile environment. Figure out what you're going to do, add complexity, don't build it. Simple things, you can build them into more complex things. If you build something complex, it's going to fail. From guaranteed, complex things that fail always start out because you start to make them too complex up front. That's called Gall's Law, Gall.
Wow.
I kind of misquoted it, but that's he was a systems. He invented, kind of the whole idea of systems theory and system practices and stuff. And one thing he observed over hundreds of consulting engagements and things is that if you start out with a complex system, it's guaranteed to fail.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, so right, keep it simple.
Yeah, so that's how they did the original Atlas rockets and Mercury and Apollo and everything. They started with we have this simple problem, let's fix that. And now what's the next problem? What's the next one? They didn't say, we've got to build a 3-stage rocket with all these electrical systems and stuff. They just hit it one problem at a time. And over time, it took a while. Over time, they invented stuff that nobody had thought of before and got to the moon. Amazing.
Right. And that's life or death.
Yeah.
So that's really the pressure.
Yeah. What was the book I forgot it by the coordinator, but Failure is Not an Option was the title of the book that he wrote.
Right. In those cases, right. You have to do it like someone's life depends on it.
And that's what I've learned as I've gone into different companies with, from different industries and things like that. Even in retrospect, when I wasn't doing this, I could look back and say, it would have worked better if I had done this. And I find that if you step back and think, what's the real goal here? The goal is to get a problem, find out where the real problem is that's causing you not to get something out the door the way you want to get it out the door, whether it's supporting a customer internally, building a product internally, doing software. Figure out where the constraint is, work on that. Don't overburden that constraint by pushing stuff into it and letting the blockade grow and grow. Stop doing other stuff. Get that thing leveled to a degree. Get constant feedback, and then start letting things flow. And you start with small problems and just continue to work at them, and you'll ultimately get things moving very, very well.
Yeah, it's important to reflect on it, even at a later date when you have some distance, to reflect and then improve going forward. It's interesting. Sometimes when people interview and they have a lot of experience, the feedback from the client is, even though they have 5 years of experience, they didn't feel it was cumulative. They felt like they had 1 year of experience repeated.
Yeah.
So I think it just highlights how to reflect and constantly improve.
Yeah. And I think even in what I would call a repetitive job, there's opportunities for you to go and learn new stuff. And it's just part of my nature. I've always been curious about other things. And so even in any job I'm in, I'm always trying to learn more about either that industry or more about how to do my job better, what the current trends are and things. I tend to listen to and I apologize to my cohorts at Gartner and Forrester and the consulting firms. I have a lot of respect and they provide great value. But I always listen to what they say with a grain of salt, because they're listening to a lot of companies and kind of averaging what's going on out there. I listen to people who are having problems and, who are trying to fix their problems right now, because that that tends to be the people who are trying to innovate in the current time. And ultimately, that'll find its way into recommendations from consultants and stuff. But I tend to talk to the people in the industry a lot.
Are there certain groups you belong to? Like, where are you finding this information?
Yeah, just about every company I've belonged to, worked for, has been in an industry, and there's been some kind of industry alliance. As a matter of fact, last week I was in a conference in St. Louis with a bunch of utilities. I work for a public utility. And although it was great to talk to vendors and have a couple of things there, the real learning I got was talking to my fellows, architects and engineers in the other utilities who are trying to face the same kind of problems. How do you integrate things like solar and wind into the grid system effectively? Those things are transient. A sunny day, you get a lot of solar. A cloudy day, you don't. Windy day, the wind is good. You get into the stills and the wind goes away. So you have these, you can't depend on it the way you can, a hydroelectric or nuclear or even a fossil burning thing. Those you control the burn and the capacity and the rate of generation. And then how do you distribute that stuff out to people and effectively and avoid the problem, the one we saw in Texas last year? They still talk about that. I think it's kind of funny because we don't really talk about climate change, but every utility, and there were over 50 of them there, every single one that I talked to, everybody is concerned about climate, and they're concerned about it in terms of its impact on the grid. People talk about, well, we should be burning coal. Nobody in the industry wants to burn coal. It is not a good resource. There is no such thing as clean coal burning, and having plants that do that are just very hard to maintain and very costly, and not because of the cost of coal, but it's just not a very efficient source of energy. There are a lot more efficient sources of energy, and we're developing more and more all the time. And that's the big issue, is how do we get there faster?
Right. To me, clean coal always sounded like marketing.
Yes.
Not.
It's like, jumbo shrimp with the oxymoron,
It's true, right? It's the presentation of it. And I think what you're saying, like, how do you break this down into the little problem, right? Because it's such a huge undertaking that how do you approach it and come up with solutions? That must have been a really interesting conference there.
Yeah, it was. And, it's interesting because even a lot now, we have the same issue. A lot of things that are impacting public utilities, whether it's power or whatever, is the chip shortages. And the same constraints that we have for our other supply chains are the same things. Most of the devices that are being put out into a utility now to help them manage the power distribution better are called the Internet of Things, or small devices that they're sensors and things that monitor the flow or the heat signatures of lines or the sway in the poles. It monitors everything that it can possibly, so they can try to get to an example. Sorry, I kind of digress here. An example of one of the tools that's being tested is a line down tool. They want to sense on a line within 5 milliseconds that the line has actually fallen. And, you think about some of the fires that started in California because lines were out that people didn't understand and they were still electrified, and the sparks started fires that were devastating. So the utilities are looking at, how do I sense when a line is down within milliseconds so I can shut that section of the grid immediately. So before it can spark and cause a fire. Then at the same time, they know exactly where it happened within a couple of spans of power, and they could dispatch somebody to go and make sure if there is a fire, it's getting handled very quickly. So those are the kind of things that they're paying attention to, and that's across the board. Every utility is very interested in this. And so even though they're generating power, utilities are all about, how do I manage them using current technology? And that's a big investment.
Right. And I guess the solutions you come up with are really life and death, because, right, the fires, it's so much bigger than just developing software. Yeah.
Nothing in this company works without power.
Right. Yeah.
You and I
no pressure.
You and I would be yelling across the rooftop at each other right now if that was it. So.
Right. Right. We'll have to get cans and a string.
Everything from emergency situations to, those are the high ones, emergency hospitals and things are critical. So much would come to a standstill if we had extended power outages. It's
true. Even when you have a short power outage, you realize.
Well, I live in Connecticut. We periodically, and you're close by, we get about every 2 years, every second or third year, we get some kind of storm through here that knocks our power out for 5 or 7 days.
Wow.
I've got a generator that I take good care of.
Right. Yeah. It's a key piece of equipment these days.
You run them for 12, 18 hours a day and shut them off, give them a little rest at night, start them up the next day, and then just wait for the power to come back.
It's true. Yeah, we did something similar because we were just tired of having power outages, because when they happened, it's completely disruptive. Like, you don't appreciate it when you have it, but then when you don't have it, it's very visible.
What am I going to do? Yeah.
Right. So people are really the core of success. And a global CIO wrote about you. Jerry is gifted at recruiting and developing high performance leadership teams. And that is a real talent to have. So what is your hiring philosophy? How do you approach building your team?
That's a good question. A lot of times you inherit the team. You go into a role where it's there. I usually don't like to go into a team if one is not working well, and one of the reasons they're bringing you in is to fix a major problem. You have to attend to that fairly quickly. But typically, if it's because somebody retired and they have a good team, they're just looking for, or it's a new company, they're just bringing up. You don't want to go in and make a huge change. Having been on the receiving end of that, it really disheartens people, and it can disrupt stuff for months. And so I usually go in, get the lay of the land. I talk to people, I listen. So the first part in any kind of a leadership role for me, is to put my own preferences and ideas in the background and talk to the people, talk to my peers and talk to the lines of business, people who actually use the technology, find out what it is that they like and don't like about what's going on. You're going to have to deal with things, especially projects. And so you continue to move things forward. You deal with the finances, you do budget, you do all the administrative work, and make a few tweaks here or there if you need to. Sometimes it's good to go in and do a little tweak in the organization just to show that you're paying attention and that you're willing to do some stuff. But typically, it'll take 3 to 6 months for you to figure out how things really work, especially if it's a new industry that you're not conversant in. Then the real key becomes, I don't want to go in there and change. IT departments sound the same company to company, but they don't work the same. And you have to go in and understand that culture a bit. It's okay to go in and disrupt the culture, but you should disrupt it from a point of knowledge. I've been here for 6 months. I've seen how, we have inertia around these processes. We're going to fix these processes. And here's the plan. Here's the goal. I'm going to assign this person to do it, this person to do it, put this team together. That's where you can start making the changes by matrixing people. You give some people who you don't feel have been given the voice that they could really do, give them an opportunity through a special project to gain that voice and show some of their own leadership and managerial skills. People who are, I've also run into the issue where good technical people got moved into managerial roles and they're terrible managers. So find a way to keep them, because you need that resource, but get them out of that line or into some training. If they really want to become good managers, then sometimes it's because they haven't been mentored very well. Either you do the mentoring or you in joint with somebody else who's in a different part of the company who's a very good manager, do some mentoring. And I've had good success with that too. I've seen peers of mine who are really successful at navigating the organization and stuff. And I'll get managers who I think are good, have good potential, and ask them to be mentored by these people to learn how to work within that company. And so navigating is different in every company. And so you leverage those things. It just takes time. I'm not sure. I don't really have like a written criteria for how I decide on whether somebody has potential or is going to take a role. I test people, I give them opportunities and things all the time. And the ones who respond, who seem to enjoy it, who come up with creative ideas or who really engage in it, are the ones that I'll start paying attention to. And over time, you move them along, promote them up, build the team. I found in a number of cases, the best thing to do is go out and have a drink or two after work with some of the people and break down some of the barriers and develop a camaraderie among the team. And I remember at one of my previous jobs, I had gone out to dinner with my team. I brought them all in. There was a global company, so there were about 12 of them in from my leadership team from around town, from around the world. We went out to dinner, had a few drinks, really good dinner. We had rented a bus. It was in New York City. The bus took us back to the hotel, and I got off the bus, and they all went off. And, it was their first time together, their first big union, and they came back in hungover the next morning.
So hopefully you have a big team meeting and first thing in the morning.
Yeah. I was kind of hoping that, not that I'm a big fan. Drinking in New York City is okay because you're not driving anywhere. They just went down the block, had a bar, had a really good time, and it broke down the barriers. From that point on and for the next 4 years when I managed that team, they were very, very rock solid because they knew each other. They had that interplay. And it was just, it hasn't been that way with every team that I've managed, but I find that when people can get together and not necessarily be good friends, but be friendly and talk with each other and, about things outside of work, then they learn how to solve the problems at work as a team. They don't feel like anybody has an agenda against them. Or if they do, they feel comfortable talking to the person about it. And I think you have to, we're all people. We spend a third of our life at work, and a third sleeping, and the rest of it, we're people with families and friends who have obligations. And it's good to be sensitive to that and kind of put that human face on things. So I kind of go by instinct, when it comes to that. But once I think somebody's right, I will do what I can to move them along and give them new challenges. And the litany of people who say that I threw them into something is pretty long.
Yeah, I think that brings up 2 points. Retention. I think building your team and making it cohesive really helps with retention. There's discussion with the Great Resignation. So that's possibly a way to stem the tide on that. But the second thing that came to mind was during the pandemic, there's a piece that's missing now. I guess there's maybe starting to come back somewhat, I guess, depending where you live. And I know there's not really corporate travel. So I don't know how you would work around that part of getting people together. Is that something you were able to address, or what are your thoughts on that?
We did like everybody else. We were doing, Teams meetings and things like that. I found that there's a certain point when it gets past about 6 people on a Teams call or a Zoom, then it's impossible to have the kind of interpersonal reaction. When you get up to around 6, I think that's about the max that you could have an effective video conference. And then people just start, paying attention to other stuff. And that's not good.
It's true. Right. And they have quote, Zoom fatigue from so many meetings. And I always like meeting people in person. And so far I haven't found anything to replace it. But I guess all things being considered, it's pretty good.
I found that I had more one-on-one calls. And I would do just like this, a video, single person-to-person video. And we do those where, when you're in the office and your team is all sitting outside your office area, you could walk around and bump into people. And your peers are over here. So you'd have these, drive-bys and stuff. And I found that if I thought of somebody, I just would call them. Or I would, hit them on a chat in Teams and then dial them from there, see if they were available. And try to keep that same kind of a drive-by type of thing going.
Right.
It's tough.
Yeah, it's tough, but it's great that you've recognized it and try to replicate it in the current situation.
I have to force myself to do that because I'm basically an introvert. And,
really?
So working from home and everything has been fine for me. I don't mind not commuting in, but going into the office. So it's an interesting thing especially like in a conference when I'm on stage in front of 200 and some people. I've got to put on a persona of being this person who likes to be in front of people and loves to present and stuff. Although I wasn't presenting, I was answering questions on a panel. That to me was okay because that I was just talking from my heart, what I felt about certain things, and from my brain, what I know about things. And so those are easier. I always find that if I feel confident in what I'm talking about, then the nervousness goes away, and I don't mind doing it. But I'm much better. In a working group of 6 or 7 people versus 20 people. So big meetings with 20 people, I always found I just stay quiet and watch.
Right. That is a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I also like to stay quiet and listen because I feel like I could learn a lot more about what's happening. And then what I'm saying is more pertinent.
Kind of learned it over time is that there's a continuum between extrovert and introvert. And the people sometimes in the meetings who are the more quiet ones, you need to go and ask them either as part of the meeting or when you do a round robin or something, or kind of pull them out a little bit because I know I do. I'll observe things and I'll sit there and think about it during the meeting And not necessarily what people are talking about, but, the interaction between people. And you'll see that there's these informal hierarchies and relationships and things going on. And I wonder why these two people are talking to each other over in the corner and we're snickering about something when somebody was saying something in the present. You observe these little things and you tie them together. And, every so often you come up with a nice little insight and you can ask people about it. So, how many people here have been, this happened in a meeting I was in when I was doing consulting. We were in a meeting and near the end of it, I said, so how many people here, who's been here least amount of time? And the person raised their hand and they had been there like 25 years. I'm going, so
wow.
How many, in your direct reports, how many people have been there less than 5 years? And it was all entry-level people with no managerial experience. And I said, so you guys are all getting ready to retire and there's no management behind you to fill the gap. And it was just little things like that nobody thought about that were huge for them.
Yeah, that's great that you step back and watch what's happening. Just like you said, when you go into a new company, you're watching first before you take action and giving it a lot of thought. That's probably why you build high-performing teams, right? You see where the gaps are and then hire to those gaps. So that's wonderful.
So the other thing that I was just thinking about it, when I'm done that, kind of look and listen type thing, I usually find like between the person who hired me, obviously, and then maybe one or two other people who early become trusted sources, people who have depth in the company, who've been there a long time, who are neutral, don't have a bias one way or the other. I'll bounce things off them that I'm hearing. So, hey, I was talking to Fred, I really make up some name, and they said this and this and this, and I took the notes, but when I walked away, because I'm like a multi-pass processor, I go, that doesn't make sense. Or where's the gap here? I don't understand this. I'll go to a person I've begun to build the trust with and ask them questions. And so even though I'm listening and going through meetings and stuff, I'm trying to get the feedback correct. And so my boss and other people who are key understand that I'm processing it. You have to show some forward momentum as opposed to just sitting back. Because I've been in situations where people got hired and they just sat back and they looked like they were listening, but I think they were just waiting for the paycheck.
Wow. Yeah. Right. I guess the bottom line is the results. You have to get the results. One thing I think is amazing about you, like you are a true Renaissance man. I know you're like a runner and a cyclist and a guitarist and an author who wrote a book, which I don't know how you found time to write a book while you're working. Just to let people know, the book that you wrote is called Synfin, SYNFIN, and you can find it on Amazon. But tell me, how do all those skills help you in your job, and how does all that get used?
Well, I'll start with the running and the cycling. I started running when I was in high school. I was a wrestler, and part of the development there was running a little bit. And then off season, my best friend and I would go run. And I was in Phoenix, Arizona, so you could run all year round. It wasn't a big deal. And we'd run to school, we'd run to each other's houses. And as I got into college, he became my roommate in college and at ASU, Arizona State University. And we would just go out running 2 or 3 times a week. And it just became a habit for me. And it's been that way ever since. I've just been going out. I've had a couple of times where I've stopped for a while, either from an injury or something like that. I discovered I was getting these the palatal ligament on the outside of your knee. I had a couple problems with that back in, after running for about 10 years or so. I discovered I needed to change my shoes every 6 months. And once I did that, then I was running in old shoes because then I was running off the sides and it was putting too much of a strain on. I figured as long as I kept my platforms in good shape, I was okay. And then, in cycling, that was when I had one of those knee injuries that I started riding my bike for exercise as opposed to just going back and forth to school. And I became addicted. I love riding a road bike. I have a mountain bike too. I enjoy doing that, but very few things feel as cool as being on a well-tuned road bike out on the road and just, under your own power, going up hills and going down hills and around corners really fast. And I thought I was going to be a racer at one point in time, but I did it for a couple of years, but realized I was not the caliber of, I wasn't going to go pro. I was barely going to be able to hold on to the pack anyway. So I just enjoy riding, and I still belong to a couple of clubs, and we go out every so often. It's fun. It's one thing I find is especially when I was training, I've run a couple of marathons, 3 of them. And when you get past a certain distance, all of a sudden your mind just it's like meditation to me. And that's what I really enjoy about it. I can get to that point where all of a sudden I don't really think about anything, but stuff bubbles up, and all of a sudden you see a resolution to a problem, especially like a work problem or a home problem or something. And it's nice. And that's it's kind of part of the addiction for me. It's the mental freeing up of being out there and doing that.
Right. You probably solve a lot of problems during a marathon.
Yeah. Yes. In the
You'll
training,
fix our grid. You'll fix our grid. After do another marathon, we'll have it all.
Trying to figure out a way to get the energy from all the pounding to generate electricity. Put little pumps in the shoes, make sure that the capacitors, and they store it, and then we can plug in at the end of the race and upload all of our power. Right.
I find a lot of technical people are musicians, that there is a correlation between those two things. When did you get into music? Have you always been into it?
My parents asked me, I shouldn't say forced me, but told me I needed to take violin lessons when I was a kid. And I did. I was never very good at it. But then I started playing guitar in college. Just some friends, they hung around. I got an acoustic guitar, and I've just been playing ever since. I'm not that good. I have a ton of books that I never complete. I know I can play 1,000 songs halfway through. It's just it's one of those things. I just enjoy it. I don't really. I gigged for a little bit back in my college days, but that just takes time, and I just wasn't really able to devote that much time. But it's a good relaxation for me. I just enjoy hearing the music, having it come from my fingers, and I sing to myself more than anything else. I don't have a good voice, but it's fun. It's fun. It's relaxation for me. It's more like getting into something totally different, and it stimulates, I guess, a different part of the brain. So for me, it's just like, every so often I'll hit some notes and I can just feel them in my body. It's just, oh, wow, it's just neat. And that's a satisfying feeling.
My husband plays guitar also. It helps him relax. When things are stressful, he plays more guitar. So, but it's wonderful to have the music in the house because I don't have any talent in that area.
When he turns the Marshall amp up to 10, it's been a bad day.
Right. Right. That's true. So what made you write a book?
I've always been kind of curious about it. And so I got tired of reading tech fiction where they had the technology all wrong. And, people would talk about it and it would just, God, that's not how it works. And, it's gotten much, much better over the years. People are paying attention to how it works and stuff. So I decided I had this, and I read a couple other, it was like 3 or 4 things all came together at once. And I was reading about a government thing in Nevada where they built a huge storage space, and they were recording all these phone calls. And that's the one that blew up on Obama, I think, if you remember. But this is back before, I think it was during the Clinton or after post-Clinton, might have been. There was a Wired magazine article I read about it. I started thinking, what happens with this? What happens with that? And so I decided to write. I started putting an idea down. I said, this is kind of cool. And I started just every day plugging away at it. And after a while, I got to a book and it was over and done. I was like, wow, it's pretty cool.
Wow, I have a book. So many people say they want to write a book and it's a goal for themselves, but you did it. It's on Amazon.
Yeah. Well, it's the one thing that I would say is that it's the key to writing code or writing a book, or even though I'm not good at playing guitar, people who are good at it, it's the same thing. It's persistence. You're not going to be good at it. You just up front you recognize you're not going to be, a Ludlum or somebody like that out of the box. You're not going to be J.K. Rowling day one. You just start writing. People say they have a writer's block, and I think it's because they're waiting for the correctness to come. And I think the reality is just what helped me out is my daughter told me about people getting over writer's block by going to a manual typewriter.
Wow.
Typing. So I bought a manual typewriter, which I have several of them now. And I just put it out on the table and I just started typing. And it takes about a paragraph. And the next thing you know, you're into the story, and then you're actually writing good stuff. And then you just have to edit the hell out of it. The writing happens and the edit's about 90% of the work. It just takes time. So I did it every morning. I'd get up in the morning when nobody else is up, and I would spend a half hour or 45 minutes just writing. And during the day, I always carried a notebook with me, a little little notebook, and during the day, if something came in my mind, I would jot it down. And then I'd cycle that in the next day when I was working. So
that is so cool.
But it took 18 months. So
that is not so long. I mean, to have like a whole book, like done, edited, 18 months?
No, 18 months to get it done. It took about another 6 months for getting it completed and edited. And I really didn't get it. I needed to get a professional editor, but I couldn't afford it. So,
So did you edit your own book?
So for my sister, yeah, I did for content. My sister is also, she was administrative secretary for most of her career. And so she went to formal training. She just has grammar down. And so she did the copy editing to make sure all my punctuation and grammar was correct.
So this has been a blast, Jerry. Do you have any parting thoughts?
If I had a parting thought, it's to trust yourself. People tend to, and I usually, anybody who's in a senior level role, will give you the eye roll when they hear that the CEO or the CIO or CTO is bringing in some consultants to do their job, basically. And they go, God, we're going to spend anywhere from 6 digits to 7 digits worth of money to get boilerplate. And I would have to say, unfortunately, many times that's what you get. But what I've learned is to trust my instincts, to make sure that my team is developing the right solutions and that we're doing what's right for the business. And that even if you bring a consultant in, if you know your business and how it works, and open that kimono up and just talk with them about here's how the business, not as an excuse and not as a way to try to block them at all, but to open the kimono and say, yes, if you can come up with something better than what we've already done, we're more than open to it. And really just be comfortable with that and take that time to, just understand it yourself.
That is great advice. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for doing this, Jerry.
Oh, it's been good fun.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Tech Talent Today, brought to you by Clearmont Technologies IT Staffing and Search. You can find out more at clearmonttech.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share. See you next time.